Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm once again bringing you beyond the board to talk to other teachers this time about teaching board games. So I have two very special guests with me. I have Mike Kelley, who is from One Stop Co-op Shop, and we have collaborated many times before. And I also have a new friend, Eric Slauson, who is a former middle school English teacher who now does ed tech. Mike is a high school language arts teacher, and I teach high school Latin, which is definitely the lamest of the three. So, how are you gentlemen doing tonight?
Excellent. And as two English teachers, I think we both have roots in Latin. If I can use a pun there, Latin roots are very important to us, and vocabulary and SATs and other things. So thank you for what you do.
See, based on what Eric just said, I think that he's already a better language arts teacher than I was. Oh, wait, I know about those, sort of.
Don't worry, we can fix that on the side. I got you.
Sure. Yeah, that's for after the call.
So I actually have a question for y'all. So we're all teachers. Do you often find yourselves in the role of teaching games to other people, either in your game group, or I know, Eric, that you teach in your classroom as well, games?
Yeah, I tend to bring kind of the new games to my game group, whether it's something that might be, just like in the hotness of the industry, or more frequently something I have just kind of randomly found on Kickstarter or Amazon. I tend to buy a lot of like weird games, so I am the person who brings it to the table and teaches everybody kind of how to play. Or the person who reads the rule book and kind of tries to like simplify it there at the table.
Yeah, and I'm the same. Especially now that I'm reviewing games and getting review copies. Back when we were meeting in person and before quarantine, I would bring new games often and teach them to everybody. And then as a designer, of course, at cons and stuff, it's just endless teaching, and
Yes.
and play testing. Yeah, Eric, you know all about that.
Yeah.
And then even now with kind of online gaming being a hotter thing with coronavirus and all that, through our Slack at One Stop Co-op Shop and all of that, I've been doing a lot of teaching on Tabletop Simulator. Like people will just be like, I want to learn this game, and we'll just jump on TTS together, and I'll kind of walk them through it. So yeah, I feel like I'm doing more game teaching now than I almost ever have, which is fun for me. I enjoy it.
That's awesome. So I actually have a horrible confession to make, which is I do teach games to students a lot at Game Club. But I'm horrible about bringing and teaching games at game night because everyone I play with always has the newest, hottest Kickstarter and wants to play it, and I usually won't have bought it. So I've actually been accused of using my game group to learn games, and it's totally true. And I just thank them for their time.
Sure. Yeah, why else? Why else would you have a game group? Yeah, spread the love.
But this is a controversial term, but I figured who better than teachers to talk about, quote, the teach of a game. Because we talk a lot about what order to teach things in, or what order to teach the rules in, or, have a sample turn, like all the technical stuff. But I also think that as teachers, we think a lot about kind of the energy that we bring to our teach, in quotation marks.
Right.
And also the environment that we're creating for people to learn. And I think that fits interestingly into conversations about gaming, accessibility, making people feel welcome at the table. So I have consulted both of you. You're both game designers and you're both teachers. So who better to have this conversation than you two?
There are dozens of us.
Yeah, I was going to say. Countless people are better to talk about this, but we will do our best.
Yeah. All right. So here we are. Let's.
So Eric, you both design games for the classroom, and you have designed several. So what is your approach to testing games with students, to designing games that are meant to work with them? Let's start with the kids, and we'll extrapolate out to teaching other adults.
Sure. So I guess when you're designing a game that's going to be used in the classroom, when you're designing a lesson or a unit, there's always kind of what we call in education like a learning objective, and that's like what you want the student to know at the end of the lesson, or what skill do you want them to grow during the lesson. And in normal tabletop design, you might think like mechanics first or theme first, and there's some of that in like kind of educational game design, but you had to kind of have to keep in mind the through line of what do you want the students to learn, or what do you want the players to learn. And ideally, all of that gets married together into a nice game gumbo, and like they learn while playing. I think as kids we all played like kind of roll to move games in elementary school or middle school, where you roll to a spot and you answer a trivia question and then you keep going or whatever. But then
God.
it's essentially just trivia with dice, and so the ones that actually the experiences that actually get students engaged are the ones that are like actually fun, and have kind of engaging mechanics, or kind of a flow to them, that where they can kind of either feel like the person who is during that event, like the historical event you're talking about, or they are kind of inside the whatever the cell that you're trying to teach, or they're physically moving around the periodic table, or whatever you're having them do. It's trying to One of the big challenges of teaching is making things feel real, and when you're teaching kind of vocabulary words in a vacuum, it's hard for students to learn them, and that's where a lot of gamification comes in. Is it throws a context around the words or around the concepts. So I think that's mainly what I go to, is like trying to think of a fun context to trick people into learning.
It's a trap, kids.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're already trapped. They're in school. but yeah, trap their minds.
I always think back to Hocus Pocus. Ooh, it is a prison for children.
Yeah, that was my favorite.
That's right.
So I like what you're saying about context and about creating fun and engagement. So when I play games with my students, I am actually typically looking to bond with them after school or outside of a school context.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, playing games with students is explicitly about creating a non-class, non-grading kind of bond. Do you find that it's easier to bond with your students within the context of the educational games you make as well?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I think there's students are very much in the have a lot of anxiety about assessment, being assessed. Some students are very into pleasing the teacher and trying to say the exact right answer that you want. So when I have introduced games to my students, like educational games or whatever, I'm generally always like just like a referee, or I'm like kind of way back in the back of the classroom, kind of like a GM or something. I'm just like helping to run the game, and then I let the students just kind of interact with each other, so that they're not trying to I guess they're trying to play with each other. They're working together, or they have a sense of competition between each other. And then occasionally I'll jump in to give them that excitement of trying to play against Mr. Slauson and beat Mr. Slauson at his own game. But yeah, I think in general, most of the time we use games in education as kind of like like a reward or a treat or whatever, it's as a supplement to the normal lesson. So I think it's a great time to kind of let some of that assessment go, but as a Mike, you can kind of speak to this as well as a teacher and as somebody who is like constantly demoing games at conventions. You learn like to read people and who's not having fun and maybe why. And so part of the reason why I step back is so that I can pay attention to the students who are not engaged and try to figure out if it's because they don't know the content, they don't understand the content, maybe they just don't think the game is fun. I can kind of parse that out, and then if I can identify the students who don't understand the content, that I can kind of cycle back to those students outside of the game. But I think during the game, yeah, it's just like make it fun. Make the experience fun, make the design fun, and then kind of step back and watch how students engage in the material. We have, as teachers, a lot of times we feel like if we're not directly involved in something, we're like not teaching, like if we ever are not at the front of the room, or if we're like sitting at our desk while the students are working on something, it feels like lazy or whatever. But if the opposite end is like being, like a helicopter teacher, or like constantly meddling and micromanaging what the students are doing. And then, then they don't have they're afraid to fail. They don't have experiences failing and then trying again. I try to give students some autonomy and some wiggle room to play independently.
Mike, do you play games with your students, or are you mostly teaching at cons these days?
I am an unfun teacher. I do not play games with my students, generally speaking, except for maybe a rare Kahoot or something like that.
Oh, Kahoot.
Yeah, I mean, even my kids, like just this past year, for example, they're like, "Oh, please, Mr. Kelley, bring in one of your games. We want to play it." And I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, maybe." And then I never do.
Maybe means no.
Maybe means don't ask me, and hopefully you'll forget.
So at cons, though, when you teach, I really like some of the stuff that Eric had to say about engagement. How do you know if somebody's engaged? And what are some of the things that you do to kind of see if you can turn them on to the game that you're teaching?
So I think engagement looks similar whether you're teaching a game or teaching a concept. You can describe it to a student, leaning forward, eyes darting between things and looking at things, not checking your phone. Engagement is something that is usually pretty clear to see, although sometimes people will seem very disengaged, and then you'll find out that they were listening attentively the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for a lot, like especially for game teaching, whether it's at a convention or at game night, it's tough, for me at least, but I think for most people, to salvage even an early disengagement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, definitely once you're halfway through a game, if somebody is just done with the game, it's almost impossible at that point to turn them around. You might be able to make them like the game the next time you play it, but there's a good chance that they've kind of decided this is not my game, I am not enjoying this, and they aren't going to change their mind. I do think there's a sweet spot in the first 5 to 10 minutes for you to change your strategy, because something I believe strongly in teaching games is there's no right way to do it because your audience is going to change.
Right.
Some people want to get started. Like, they'll just fly by the seat of their pants. You can throw rules at them. Let's just start playing a turn and we'll see how it goes. Some people, especially in competitive games, need to know every rule, every permutation, or they'll feel like you've disadvantaged them and you're messing them up and they can't win anymore. Luckily, I tend to avoid that with solo and co-op players. And, if you see that people are starting to disengage in those first 5 minutes, you want to switch your strategy. So if you see that everyone's kind of glazing over as you go over the rules, be like, all right, never mind. Let's just play the first round. We'll figure it out as we go. I think that's one of the most important first tips I'd have for anyone teaching a game. And that goes for teaching in general. If I'm a teacher and I've made this amazing lesson, amazing in my mind, and, I start doing it with the kids and they're just like immediately out of it and nothing I thought was working, is actually working. It's a rookie teacher who just sticks to the script because it's the script.
Yeah.
A teacher who is, more experienced and more flexible will be ready to throw everything out, pick up the pieces of what was most important, and rebuild them into some other like form on the fly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, many a lesson plan have I scrapped, even though I thought that it was going to go really well.
Yeah.
And even if it goes well with like your first period, it might bomb with your second period, and you still need to be ready to change it up. You can't just bemoan it and be like, "But they liked it.
Yeah.
Why don't you like it?"
That is painfully accurate. Oh man. And Eric, actually you hit on the two things that I think are the most interesting to talk about as teachers when it comes to teaching games. So you talked about engagement,
Mm-hmm.
but you also talked about making people less afraid to fail. And I personally think this is an issue that we have in games. You know, we talk a lot about gatekeeping. I play a lot of word games, so you get a whole lot of people who want to point out, you know, the facts of the matter to you. And
Yeah.
you know, I think that it can feel like your whole ego is on the line when you're just learning a game.
Right.
And how do you like to create an environment for people who are learning games from you that will make them happy to be playing the game, happy to be playing with you, and happy to be trying something again with you down the line?
Yeah, I think something that Mike touched on, you know, about every kind of group being different and different situations. You know, how I teach a game at a convention is going to be different than how I teach it at a you know, board game group. At a convention, I have 30 seconds to get somebody to, you know, be into it or not, and so I have to, you know, really hit the bullet points and then kind of feel things out from there. But at a board game night, I can kind of luxuriate in my explanation a little bit more and feel the situation out. But I think for me, one of the first things that I try to figure out is well, first, I mean, don't kind of, you want to bring a game that your group is going to enjoy, you know, like you kind of or maybe have like a backup game, as Mike is talking about scrapping a lesson. You know, there have been times when I was like, oh, you know, like I was really into. I also have a board game club at school, and I'm like really into escape room games. And I told my students about them, and they were like, "Oh, that's really cool." And so I brought like a Deckscape, which is a style of unlock game or a escape room game. And our board games club is after school, and so I brought it out, and I was like, "This is a game I was telling you about," and kind of got into the explanation, and we started the like timer to go, and they were just like burned out, you know, like they'd been at school for 8 hours, and it just like completely flopped. They like were not
Yeah,
engaged.
they didn't want to solve riddles, Eric.
Yeah. And so like while they liked the idea of it, I should have probably thought a little bit more about, you know, context. But I had, you know, a very simple like Uno style game in my bag as a backup, and they loved that. So, you know, kind of thinking about, I like having backup games. I also like, as far as when we're talking about teaching the game, Mike talked about how there's different kinds of players, and some people like to have all of the information, and some people kind of like to jump in. That's generally a question that I ask after I explain like how to win. You know, like Elizabeth, you talked about like go in order and talk about this first and talk about this and talk about this. Well, after I explain like how you win or your basic turns or whatever, I generally ask, do you want to play a couple rounds with commentary? Like I will explain why I'm doing what I'm doing, or like as you play, I might say, oh, that's a great move because X, or oh, do you have a blue card? Because if you have a blue card, you could do Y or whatever. So like I generally will play like a couple rounds that are just like for practice. In teaching, we call this I do, we do, you do. The I do is like when the teacher explains what's going on, and the I do an example on the board. We do is kind of we walk through it together. I might do like a fill in the blank, or you might be able to work with a partner or something. And then you do is you doing it independently. So I kind of use that kind of same model when I'm teaching a game. I explain it to you, and then we'll do like a couple practice rounds, and then we'll shuffle it back up, and then kind of go from there with the you do section.
Yeah, I'm actually also a big believer in the open-handed sample turn. I feel like it's people can look like they're listening to you talk, especially because adults are very good at that. I'm not even going to talk about how many faculty meetings I've been very attentive throughout.
Thank God for
but,
cell phones.
but I really like the sample turn, partially because I think it gives people a feel for the rhythm of the game with no pressure. And I think partially because it lets you make some of your first mistakes
Hmm.
in a no consequence environment. And I think that adults don't like to make mistakes in front of each other. I mean, kids hate it too, but at game night, when everybody's trying to relax, it's nothing dampens the fun like somebody feeling dumb in front of somebody else,
Sure.
or at least I feel that way. And yeah, I think that offering sample turns is a good way to kind of mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah, and also I think not just sample turns, but depending on the game, sometimes it's nice to do sample scoring rounds or sample kind of like end of the
Yeah.
game rounds. I think the first one that kind of put this in my mind was Dungeon Lords by Vlada Chvátil. He had the player, like this is in the rule book, he has you play through combat rounds. In Dungeon Lords, you build your dungeon for heroes to come into, and then you have combat and see who fights off their heroes the best. So he had you play combat rounds with a variety of like factors in play, and then he's like, all right, now look at the rules and see how you get those
Mhm.
things. How do you get those monsters? How do you get those traps? Or I'm thinking of something like Jeremy Howard and I played Into Deep recently, which is, I think, coming back to Kickstarter.
Mhm.
And that's like one with, you can get points from a lot of different things. And one of you might be like the trader and you might lose a bunch of points. So just kind of seeing how all that stuff pans out. So, because I don't know, I guess it all comes back to the idea of connections, right? Like learning is about making connections between prior
Yeah.
knowledge and like building new knowledge from that. So it's fine for you to say, here are the 5 actions you can take, but those are all kind of these abstract ideas. But then if I have a sample scoring round, again, depending on the game, I can see, oh, okay, so that's how B and C kind of combine together. Oh, that's why I care about
Yeah.
D. And then when I learn about the actions, it'll all hopefully come together much better.
That makes a lot of sense. So the other thing I kind of want to talk about is, so as a teacher, I've discovered that the thing that gives me the most success in my classroom isn't anything technical that I do at all. It's creating emotional connections and a level of comfort with the people around
Mhm.
me so that they feel safe learning from me. And I think that that's something that's really hard to create in a classroom. It takes a couple weeks at the beginning of the year,
Yeah.
but I also think that it's important to create that welcoming environment at a game table, because just because you're playing with adults who drove themselves to game night doesn't mean that they don't need that feeling of emotional connection and relaxation and safety. And how do you create that environment for people that you're teaching games to? Mike, I know that some of your game sales probably depend on that.
Yeah.
Eric, the success of your playtest with students depends
Mhm.
on that. How do you do it?
Well, I guess, Liz, you had mentioned a little bit earlier ego and kind of the idea of the ego at the game table. And this, I think,
Mm-hmm.
applies to classroom teaching and it applies to teaching games. In the classroom, we already said you have to be flexible with your lesson. So if I'm a teacher and I think this is the greatest lesson ever, I worked really hard on this activity, and it becomes more about the activity or more about me or more about my lecture than it is about actually paying attention and listening to the students and helping them to learn and meeting them where they are. That's going to be a bad lesson. That's going to be a poor, opportunity for education to happen. And I think games are the same way. And I think it's a really, really easy trap to fall into because, all of us are gamers, all of us buy games. And we often have that situation where we buy a game we're super excited to play. Why wouldn't we buy it if we weren't really excited to
Yep.
play? Liz, you said people bring in like Kickstarters, the hot Kickstarter to the game table. And if I'm dying to play it, if I've played it solo a few times, you're setting yourself up for one of the worst game experiences you can have. Because if it's about your ego, if it's a competitive game, you're going to be worrying more about winning than about everybody else having a good time. You're going to worry more about winning than spreading the love of the game so they want to play it again with
Mhm.
you. And if it's a co-op or if it's a co-op game, you might worry more about winning and get into like some alpha player tendencies instead of letting other people, again, meeting them where they are, listening to them, giving them the chance to do something clever. So I think that's one of the most important things first to kind of build that environment. Check your own ego, check your own kind of potentially selfish desires with the game. Like, why are you bringing it to the table? If it's because you really want to play it, that's fine, but try to check that and make it about being with your friends, make it about helping everyone to enjoy. I mean, I'll be totally honest that when I play competitive games, especially with my wife or my son, I make suboptimal moves because I don't want to win. I want to have a great experience and I want them to feel cool. Doesn't mean I throw the game so they always win, but I want them to see neat things and have fun with the game, so they want to play it for the long run instead of playing it once, I crush them and it never gets off the shelf again.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with throwing a game the first time that you're teaching it, especially if you've played it solo several times or you've played it a bunch at conventions or whatever, and you're teaching it to 2 or 3 people who've never played it before. I mean, it seems somewhat kind of common sense that you wouldn't just go ham and use all of your tricks that you have learned. I think that your role as somebody who's introducing the game is to sell the game and show the potential, kind of engineer some fun moments. I think it's almost like, Mike, what you're saying, like the opposite of having an ego and playing a game that, because like you enjoy it and you like winning at it. It's more about almost like being like a Dungeons and Dragons GM. Like you're trying to make a fun experience for everybody else. And if that means, losing on purpose, or if that means kind of, you have like a really harsh take that option that you decide not to do or whatever. I think that's fine, especially the very first time you teach a game. Now, if everybody knows the rules, then you can kind of, start going to town on your friends. But I think the very first time, your job is to make their experience fun. It has nothing to do with like whether, you win or whether you have fun. At least that's how I see it. And we have a slightly different situation in conventions because most of the time you're not playing a full game. You're playing like a few rounds just so they understand the mechanic. And you can kind of like stack the deck so that cool interactions happen, during those turns. That's like a trick that demoers do a lot of times, is kind of organize the cards so that it looks like you're passing them out randomly, but really it's like the ideal super hype turn. But oh wow, you could do that 4-card combo on your first turn. That's really crazy.
How crazy!
You're really good at this.
You're a natural.
Buy it. So yeah, I think maybe not to that degree, but I definitely think a first play experience when you're introducing the game to other people is about the other people. So I don't have any problem, throwing a game or not being as active of a player, I guess, as I normally would in a game where everybody knows the rules.
Yeah, and to add on, I think part of building that nice environment is, I kind of already mentioned this a little bit, but just giving everyone the opportunity to shine, giving everyone the opportunity to look cool at least once. In a classroom setting, you want to, every time a student gives an answer, find the nugget of goodness in there and congratulate them for that.
Yes.
Even if 90% of it is totally wrong. It's like, oh, I love the way your brain is thinking right now. That's a really great way to go. So, and I think kind of what Eric was saying, like in a competitive game, you don't play the take that card. If you see one player is really not doing well and hasn't gotten the chance to be cool, heck, man, I'll just like throw myself on their sword.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, why'd I go there? Oh no, look what you could do to me now.
So on that note, how do you, and this is actually even harder, right? In a classroom students expect you to, correct them, to coach them a little bit. It's a little bit different among
Yeah.
peers and adult people. But how do you handle correcting mistakes and coaching people who seem to be struggling in a way that is helpful and welcoming and not condescending?
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
that's tricky.
Yeah, it's really tricky.
I think that, oh man, uh, I think games are very delicate in a classroom setting. If a student says something that is like maybe a little bit wrong or whatever, I kind of, teachers make like thousands of split-second decisions over the day. And one of the split-second decisions is like, okay, do I correct their grammar for that? Like grammatically that sentence is not correct, but like the answer is correct. So like I'm going to let that slide. Or, oh, they said the right name, but they kind of pronounced it wrong. Like I think everybody in the room understands what they were trying to say. So I'm going to let that slide. So like I think if a player plays a card that they like legally can't play, you have to kind of jump on that and say like, oh, you can't play that because you need X number of power or whatever to play it. And I think you have to do it because it will break the game if you don't. But if they're making like suboptimal moves or like I don't know, you can tell the move is valid, but it might not be in their best interest. That's when you get into that kind of gray area of asking like, hmm, do you have any attack cards? Because if you do, you can do this or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's where that first conversation comes in with the players at the table. Like, do you want me to correct you? Do you want me to kind of give commentary as you're playing, or do you just want to see like how the game works and flows and that kind of stuff? And I'll just jump in if anything gets like, broken. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think there's some tonal aspects to it too. So I think for me, when I'm correcting people, I always try to do it with a smile. I try to keep it really casual and relaxed. And even if it's the 20th mistake of the same kind, and I'm kind of starting to lose some of my sanity, and I'm starting to wonder if this is a Lovecraft game, I find that I try to never outwardly show that I'm losing my patience.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's no better way to shut somebody out than to make it clear that I'm tired of
Yes.
them. And I feel like it's my duty
Yeah.
not to.
That's a very powerful point. You don't want, you don't want to make somebody feel like they are an annoyance, or that their questions are slowing the game down or anything like that. I think again, this is, I think one of the reasons you had me and Mike on here is we have like all of these things in like our teacher toolbox that are little like mental tricks or whatever, like things like saying that's a good question even if it's not, like we all are like, oh man, that's a really good question, and then explaining it even if you've explained it a couple times before, or saying like, like when I learned the game, like that didn't make sense to me either, kind of like throwing yourself uh kind of on their same level of confusion. So there's like, there's a lot of things that we do as teachers in our infinite patience that I think you can use when you're teaching a game. And a lot of it, as you said, Liz, like is about it's just patience and teaching with a smile and understanding that they have never seen this game before. Like you may have played it 100 times or whatever, and this is their first time seeing that icon or learning that really edge case rule or whatever. So yeah, you gotta have a lot of patience.
That being said, there are some gamers that I am tired with. and I
Don't
mean,
call me out, Mike.
No. You're lovely, Liz. A lot of times when we're gaming, students, teenagers are very malleable. I won't say adults aren't, but I give my students a lot of grace. When like a 40-year-old has over years calcified the way they think and the way they act, like I still try to be nice to them, but some people are just bad gamers in a lot
Yep.
of ways,
Yep.
like in demoing my games, in playing, luckily with no one in my game group, but like in playing at conventions with random people that I meet, there are gamers who are bad winners. There are gamers who are bad losers. But the stuff that gets on my nerves more, kind of going to what you're talking about, Liz, is, people who are like, don't help me at all. Don't tell me anything. I'm going to play the way I want. And then when I lose horribly, I'm going to say the game
Yeah.
sucks. And it's like, well, that is a horribly destructive mindset. I don't know why you game at all, but that's what you've decided you want your life to be. So I'm not going to waste my energy trying to change you 45-year-old person to be the way that I want you to be.
Yes. Yeah, sure. You can't, sometimes you just gotta, let people kind of be how they are. When you're in your gaming group, you have, I think, over time you feel out people's personalities, and everybody kind of gives each other a lot of leeway. But as you're playing with strangers at a convention, or whether you're demoing or you just grab something from the library and put up players wanted or something like that, you're going in blind. And so if you are teaching to somebody, this not uncommon gamer that Mike is talking about,
Yeah.
I don't know, kind of, they've kind of made that choice, and you just kind of, I don't know, take their criticisms with a grain of salt, and I don't know, hope it doesn't kind of poison the experience of the other players.
Yeah, so my game night is actually a public
Mm-hmm.
meetup, technically. So I miss it terribly right now because it's at a game store. And so I actually feel like I have a different set of ethical obligations at that game
Mm-hmm.
night because strangers can
Yeah.
come and want to play with you. And I actually think this is the last thing that teachers are trained to do that maybe we don't always think about at game night because we want to go play with our friends. And that is, don't, no child left behind, no gamer
Yeah.
left behind, right? If there's somebody who's kind of on the edge of the game, somebody who clearly wants to play and doesn't know how to engage, somebody who's watching the action at the table and kind of awkwardly standing there waiting to be invited in, I think that if you're at a public event, even if the person turns out to be a jerk, even if it is a non-ideal gamer, right, I think part of embodying like that good teacher attitude,
Yep.
right, is inclusion. Hey, do you want to sit down? We don't have, we're going to be playing this game for a while, but do you want to sit with me and see what I'm doing? Anything to invite somebody else in. So how do you guys engage people who look like they might want in, but they're not totally sure how to be part of your group?
Oh man, Liz, I mean, I'm more socially awkward than it might seem. You're acting like I'm an expert at this, but I don't know that I am. I mean, I don't know. I have more experience with this as a teacher, kind of like you said. Like I remember when I was running an improv comedy group at my school. Somehow I got kind of like all the misfit toys, from the island and the Rudolph the Red-Nosed
Yeah.
Reindeer special, and I would just throw them into something quickly. So I guess maybe that could work for games. Like, hey, like if I have a filler there or I have something quick, it's like, hey, like, I don't want to, both for them in case they don't gel with the group and for me in case they don't gel with us, like play something that's 15 minutes and then be like, hey, that was great. Okay, we're going to play this one. It's only 4 players. Sorry, but thanks for being here. If it all crashes and burns. But yeah, I don't know. This is actually something that causes me stress. Like I'm the person who like is at a convention with my friends and someone walks over and my heart rate goes up. So it's something I need to get better at.
Yeah, I think it's keeping an eye out for people who are watching, and I tend to uh, kind of try to engage with the people who are just watching, and ask, like, oh, have you played this before, is generally the question that I ask, because if they say yes, we can have like a little friendly conversation, like, oh yeah, I really like it or whatever. And if they say no, I can kind of give them kind of a pitch for why it is fun, and then maybe have like a side conversation like, oh, we're already in the game, but like, I might play again after this, or you want to try to meet up or something like that. I think it's if you're in the middle of a game, that's kind of all you can do is invite them to watch and get a feel for it. But I think that when you're in the position of like running a public meetup, or you're I don't know, even at a convention, you see somebody who doesn't have a group. I go to a lot of conventions solo, and something that I appreciate people have done is like, if I can't join their game, they might recommend like a similar game that I might be able to like get to the table more easily. Especially if like it's all checked out of the library or something like that. Like, oh, try this one. It's a solo, or it's a, like you were saying, Mike. It's a filler version of this to see if you like it. But I think just ask people in a nice way why they are watching. Like, oh, have you played this before? Or you most of the time can't ask, do you want to play? But
Right.
you might ask them like, hey, like, what kind of stuff do you like to play, or why does this look interesting? And then ideally, maybe that conversation goes long enough that the game you're playing ends, or they feel comfortable enough watching until the end of that game, and then they can sit in on the next one or something like that. But just don't ignore somebody who's standing awkwardly over by the edge of your table.
Yeah, I actually went to my very first convention by myself. It was Dice Tower
Oh,
Con.
yeah.
And, I was already a Dice Tower contributor, but I mean, I'm still not a big deal, and I really wasn't a big deal then. So,
we think you're a big deal.
I know, you're a big deal to me.
I appreciate it. Teacher encouragement right there. But I believe. So, but I spent most of the first day there by myself, not really knowing what to do. And I remember going back to my hotel room and just needing to cool off and feeling really sad because I felt like I didn't know what to do. And then there was like a Dice Tower event that night, and I actually met other people. And, then I will actually forever be grateful to Mike Delisio, Dan Hughes, and the Brothers Murph, that group, because they kind of adopted me enough that when they saw me around and they were playing a game, hey, do you want to join this game of Metro X? Hey, do you want to pop into this game? And just having somebody that I knew I could get an occasional game with really helped. And then everything got better. Yeah. Everything got better.
It is tricky being at a convention solo, just because I think I don't know, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because people there are also on their vacation. They came there because they want to play that game, or they want to have the ideal experience. So like, on one hand, you shouldn't demand that they stop playing with their friends to talk to you. But as somebody who on several occasions, there's however many 100 tables in the middle of this giant amphitheater, and I will just like walk up and down the aisles to see what people are playing in free play, and I'll stand next to a group for watch several turns, and nobody talks to me. And I don't know. I think that is. I wish it was like the exception to the rule, but I think most people are very engaged in their own game and their own friends, and which is fine. But I think it doesn't take a lot to just say like, oh yeah, we're playing whatever, it's really fun, even though that's a closed-ended comment that doesn't really invite a response. You're at least kind of acknowledging their presence. And again, like I said, not making them feel like an annoyance. You don't want to stop at every group in 100 tables and feel like they are bristling at your presence. So just again, as teachers, we're very touchy-feely, and we think a lot about how hard it is to be an adolescent or a middle schooler or whatever. And so like, a lot of times when we're walking through the hallways, like, we just say hey to kids like for no reason, or like, how's your day going? And it's not because we we really want to know. It's because maybe like we might be like the only person who has talked to that kid all day. Like they might have a really bad home situation, or they might be constantly bullied. Like you don't know people's situations, and if me saying like, "Hey man, I like that shirt," is the most positive interaction for a kid, like over the course of the day, like I will take it. So you just never know like what little thing can really make somebody's con, or give them the courage to ask if they can play the next game, or ask for your email or Twitter or whatever to see if you want to play a game later. Yeah, just one sentence.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to give up your whole day to somebody, but you see them, you acknowledge them. I think that's a good thing. All right, so I have taken up a lot of y'all's time. So concluding thoughts, and then I'll ask where we can all find y'all on the internet. So what I've got out of this conversation personally is that if you are thinking about gaming in the role of a teacher and in the role of somebody who's facilitating gaming for other people, you can't let it be all about you, and you need to be centering other people's experiences. Would y'all have anything to add to that?
I think always have a backup. Always have a backup game. Generally a shorter, lighter version maybe of what you were teaching. And then also, nope, that's it. That's the only one. I have a backup. I did not have a backup comment. I should have had a backup comment.
Yeah, and I guess a final thought for me is be ready to scrap a game if no one's having fun. Be ready to change the way you're teaching a game if people aren't engaged with it. Just be flexible so everyone can have a good time.
Yes, and the priority is having a good time, which I've had with y'all tonight. So thank you so much for coming on. Eric, where can people find you on the internet? And is there anything you want to plug about yourself for us?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at Slauson Designs. That's SLAUSON Designs. I have a couple games out. I have Tattoo Stories. That's a party game by Bicycle. That's on Amazon. That's on their website. I have Nerd Word Science, which is a science party game that was designed at Genius Games, which is a great educational game company. That is, the games are fun primarily, and then they happen to be educational. But Nerd Word Science is on Amazon and the Genius Games website. And then I have another party game coming out later this year called Monstrosity. It's like Monstrosity, but with draw in the middle. And that is available for pre-order at the Deepwater Games website. And you can Google all of those and find YouTube videos and see if that's something you might enjoy.
Fantastic. Mike?
I'm with the One Stop Co-op Shop, so go check out our YouTube channel, our podcast every Sunday. We have a Slack. We have a, Discord, Facebook page. We're in all those places. So yeah, One Stop Co-op Shop. That's the best place to find me for all those fun gaming things.
And I can be found anywhere on the internet as Beyond Solitaire. So thank you all so much for listening. And thank you, Mike and Eric, for coming on here with me tonight.
Yeah, it was our pleasure. Well, I shouldn't talk for you, Eric. It was definitely my pleasure.
I did enjoy this. So yes.
Happy gaming, everybody.